Hello, welcome to the Politics Hub. You're looking at live pictures from the House of Commons where MPs have been debating decriminalising abortion. You can see the MPs now just dividing on those amendments where they'll be voting to two amendments on the crime and policing bill, which includes an amendment seeking to lift women who end their pregnancies outside existing abortion law out of the criminal justice system. Of course, as soon as we get the result of the vote, we will bring that to you live. But in the meantime, we can go to Parliament Central Lobby. And Sky's political correspondent, Sarina Barker-Singh, is there. Sarina, just explain what's happening.
Well, Sophie, this is a divisive issue, always has been, and probably always will. But what MPs are debating currently, I think I can hear the division bell right now, but what they have been debating are two amendments, as you say, to the crime and policing bill. And this will fundamentally change abortion law if one of them goes through Parliament. And essentially, no woman can be prosecuted for their own abortion. Now, the reason this is happening is because 6 women in the last 3 years have been under investigation for their own abortion, some for miscarriages, and MPs have found that uncomfortable, and that's because technically abortion is still illegal in Wales and England, allowed up to 24 weeks and then after in certain circumstances. But because of this, you can be penalised, investigated by the police. Abortion providers can ask for details from abortion providers, medical information from these women to start these investigations. And MPs are voting on whether that should still be allowed. Now, the two are slightly different. One would treat abortion as a fundamental right, so it goes further than one of the others, and we understand that only one will be voted on if the first NC1 passes. There are lots of MPs that have been uncomfortable with this, from talking about the rights of the baby. You had Desmond Swain saying that there are 2 lives involved in this. Another argument has been that the current law acts as a deterrent, so that if abortion is allowed up to term or not criminalised for it, then this could increase in things like abortion, coercive abortion, or in cases of abuse. Fundamentally, these abortion amendments do not change the 24 limit or the procedure for 2 doctors to be involved in the process, but it would decriminalise up to term. Another argument that MPs have been uncomfortable with is this idea that they are amendments. This isn't its own bill like the assisted dying bill. It's not a private member's bill. It's not being brought by the government, so it is just an amendment. But we'll find out very soon which amendment could be voted on and then what the vote will be.
Thank you very much, Sarina. As we'll go back, of course, to Sarina Barker-Singh when we have some more news on the result of that vote. They're currently voting on the amendment put forward by the MP Tonia Antoniazzi, and they're going to find out what happens with that one, whether or not it's passed by MPs or not. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The former Shadow Cabinet Minister, Jonathan Ashworth, and the broadcaster and former Conservative Minister, Dehenna Davison. Great to have you both on the programme. It's a conscience issue, of course, abortion. Dehenna, to you first. Where do you stand on this issue?
I've always taken quite a, not so much a liberal approach to abortion, but a liberal approach to women's right to choose. And I think that's what this issue really comes down to. Of the 2 amendments, were I still in Parliament, I probably would be voting for Tonia's amendment, because I don't think it's right that women who unexpectedly may find themselves pregnant, may not have known they were pregnant until very, very late in the stage, can be prosecuted for accessing perhaps a telemedicine abortion, making a really, really difficult decision. I don't think any woman chooses to have an abortion lightly. It's a really, really deeply personal, difficult decision. So to be potentially prosecuted, or even if not formally prosecuted, investigated by the police for something that's already so distressing, to me is absolutely not the right thing. But I think the approach taken by Tonia and her amendment is the right one. It means that women themselves, vulnerable women, are not prosecuted, not investigated by the police and have to go through that horrendous, horrendous process. But that the term limit is still at 24 weeks and provision of abortion cannot be done beyond 24 weeks. So medical practitioners could still not perform abortions beyond that point. To me, it's kind of a healthy in-between that protects the right people, but also recognises this is a really, really difficult, thorny issue.
Jonathan, what about you?
I absolutely agree with everything Dehenna's just said there. I mean, if I was in Parliament, I'd have been voting for this particular amendment that's down in the name of a Labour colleague, Tonia. I just think it is staggering, frankly, that in this day and age that women have been prosecuted, have gone to prison in recent years for making an incredibly distressing decision, which is fundamentally about their own body. And I just think, I mean, I don't even know the circumstances of their prosecutions, but given this is already such an upsetting thing for a woman to go through, I mean, who to then face prosecution, to be asking questions about who's reported them to the relevant authorities as well, the circumstances of that must be horrendous on every front. So, look, I suspect this amendment will pass in a few moments, which means the subsequent Stella Creasy amendment falls, which feels a bit messier and a bit more complicated anyway. So that feels to me the right order of things, but we'll find out in a few moments.
Yeah, it does feel like the first amendment that they're voting on now is the one with the wider support in the House and more likely to go through if it does. Really interesting to hear both of your thoughts on this. I'm sure we'll come back to you later because we'll be bringing that vote to you as soon as we get it, of course. But just while we're waiting, I did want to move now to the situation in the Middle East and that conflict between Israel and Iran, which shows no sign of de-escalating. Donald Trump left the G7 summit in Canada early, and this evening he's put out a statement saying the US knows the location of Iran's supreme leader, but they won't kill him for now. Well, this is what the president said on his Truth Social channel a couple of hours ago. We know exactly where the so-called supreme leader is hiding. He is an easy target, but is safe there. We are not going to take him out, kill, at least not for now. But we don't want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers. Our patience is wearing thin. And then he ends unconditional surrender in capital letters. Well, Sky's David Blevins joins us now from Washington. David, what do you make of the latest statement from Donald Trump?
Well, we know that the President is due to meet imminently with his National Security Council behind closed doors here at the West Wing, but the diplomacy around all of this, rather extraordinarily, is being played out in public because the President is posting it in real time. 3 posts in rapid succession, the one declaring that they had control of Iranian airspace now, the second containing just 2 words, unconditional surrender, and the third, the one you've just read, stating that they know where the Supreme Leader of Iran is hiding but don't intend taking him out for now. The very fact that that is an option on the table tells us that things have changed significantly, Sophie. For months, the Americans have urged Israel not to strike Iran and have urged Iran to do a deal with US negotiators in relation to its nuclear capability. Even at the weekend, they were seeking to distance themselves, the administration here, from the Israeli missiles raining down in Tehran. Things have changed. The New York Post is reporting that the Americans are considering sending B-2 bombers to help bomb underground nuclear capabilities in Iran. They've certainly moved a significant amount of military hardware into that region, and the speculation is also being fueled by comments from the Vice President J.D. Vance, who says if American people are concerned about this, he'll understand that, but that if the President uses the American military, he says it will always be in the interests of the American people. They won't take this decision lightly because embroiling themselves in this could embroil Russia in this from the other side. And of course it breaks a long campaign promise by Donald Trump that he would not embroil American troops in another foreign war.
David, thank you very much indeed. David Blevins there. I just want to take you back to the House of Commons where, of course, we are awaiting the results of the vote on an amendment to a bill which would effectively stop women being prosecuted for ending their own pregnancies. So it is to move the following clause: removal of women from the criminal law related to abortion, so that no offence is committed by a woman acting in relation to her own pregnancy. You can see there the MPs filing back into the House of Commons, and we're going to get that result shortly. In the meantime, we can talk to our panel. That's Dehenna Davison and Jonathan Ashworth. Dehenna, and just if I do interrupt you to bring the result, apologies in advance.
Duty calls, right?
Exactly. There has been some concern that this would, I guess, reignite the debate around abortion, which has been, I mean, I was going to say settled in this country, but that is probably, that's probably going too far. But do you think that that is a risk?
At this point, no, I don't think it is, because the issue is going to be settled as a part of this vote. And I know there have been calls to have a separate abortion discussion. I think a lot of people have said maybe we shouldn't tack it onto another bill, and this has been a discussion that you always have in Parliament whenever there's any bill going through that's quite broad. There will be things tacked on that perhaps don't naturally sit there in the best way, but I suppose politics is the art of the possible, and if there is a route to doing something that Tonia clearly fundamentally feels is the right thing to do, then it would be foolish not to take the opportunity to do so. And of course, we're a democracy. It's for MPs to decide specifically what they do. And if they do vote for this amendment, then I think that's the issue settled again in a democratic way, in my opinion.
And it is a deeply personal issue, as you say. It's a conscience issue. There'll be some MPs who will feel deeply uncomfortable with the idea of a baby that could be full term, that could be obviously older than 24 weeks being aborted in this way.
I mean, yes, absolutely. But I think the nature of this debate in the United Kingdom tells you something about the strength of our democracy. In as much as when we confront these very difficult issues, or this, a similar set of issues around assisted dying, I think parliamentarians approach it in a very mature way, a very measured way, that sort of partisanship is put to one side, and MPs genuinely make a judgment based on conscience. And that, I think, contrasts greatly with the United States, where abortion is what us politicians called a dividing line between the two main political parties. Opinions on abortion become a factor in their election campaigns. And I think that does a tremendous disservice to people who are faced with making these awful choices. And I think it's a good thing that we don't have that type of debate in this country.
Yeah, and the fact that you're saying there about it's not like a divided across party political lines. You've got two people here from different parties.
I rarely agree with Jonathan on anything when we're on TV together. Yeah, here we are.
Exactly. Do you think, but it's interesting you mentioned the other states though, and the fact that abortion has become this dividing line. And there has been, I guess some concern that, if we're talking about decriminalising effectively abortion, then it could become more of a political issue. I mean, do you accept that?
I don't think so. I mean, look, there'll be more conservative, and I use conservative with a small c there, I don't mean in a partisan sense, MPs who presumably vote against this motion, but I don't anticipate they'd want to sort of undo it or try and make it into an election campaign. And look, I don't know where Reform stand on these sorts of things, but I doesn't feel like a sort of thing that Reform either would want to make a big party political issue.
And we have, like you say, actually said that the tone of the debate this week has been respectful. It's been people putting forward their genuinely held beliefs, which is what we've seen in the House of Commons debate as well. Dehenna, we have seen, of course, as you were alluding to, more recent cases of women being prosecuted for this. Is it something, and I guess it was from COVID, it became slightly easier for people to acquire their own abortions.
No, I think the sort of telemedicine approach to abortion was absolutely the right one, because even just visiting an abortion clinic or a sort of sexual health centre to get an abortion can in itself be a really scary, deeply distressing experience for a lot of women, particularly at a point before we sort of banned protests immediately outside clinics. People are being harangued for accessing basic health care, and I never thought that was right. So I think the telemedicine made possible through COVID to allow people to access those drugs following a formal consultation. This wasn't sort of dial up and the drugs are immediately posted out. There was a formal consultation with two medical experts to ensure that you are at that right stage to take the drugs. I think it's a much better approach and a much more mature approach actually to letting women make the right choices for their bodies on what is frankly a healthcare, very personal healthcare matter.
So what will happen, Jonathan, if this clause does go through?
So we'll find out in a few moments. A division, as we call them in Parliament, takes about 15 minutes. In the next 2 minutes or so, we will find out. I get the impression, it's a conscience issue, so MPs have not been whipped, but I think the government would accept the amendment, i.e. they won't try and get it out of the bill, and it will go forward and it will become the law.
Become the law, exactly. Yeah. That's it, isn't it? And we are, we can see the chamber filling up there. MPs are really filing back into the chamber, awaiting to hear the result. As Jonathan says, it's not a whipped vote, it's a conscience issue, which means it's always quite difficult to predict exactly how these will go. You can see there the four MPs, the tellers, if you like, are going up to the centre of the House of Commons, awaiting to hear from the Deputy Speaker on the result of that vote.
So you usually know who's won by which side the tellers stand, but we don't know who's telling.
Absolutely,
yeah, You can see there the Deputy Speaker Nizgani. Let's listen.
Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 379. The noes to the left, 137.
The ayes to the right, 379. The noes to the left, 137. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Order. Order. Under the order of the House of today, I must now put the questions necessary to bring this day's proceedings on consideration to a conclusion. The question is that new clause 1 now be added to the bill. As many in that opinion say aye.
Well, that is a historic moment. Women have now been... MPs have voted to say that women should now be removed from criminal law over abortion, effectively decriminalising abortion for women who choose to end their pregnancies at any stage of that pregnancy. And I have to say that is a huge majority, a majority of 242, 379 MPs in total voting yes, and 137 voting no. So that is a very, very sizable majority in favour for removing women from criminal law over abortion. That clause has gone through and will now become law. We can speak now to Serena Barker-Singh, who is in central lobby for us. Serena.
Yes, that is a huge majority, 242, as you said, which is surprising, but this is a conscious vote, so it wasn't whipped. MPs can vote how they choose according to their conscience. That's how it works. Also, confusingly, because there were 2 amendments laid down by backbenchers from the same party, again confusing that. So we didn't really know what that would look like, but now we do know. Essentially, it's on the pathway to disapplying the existing criminal law relating to an abortion for women acting in relation to their pregnancy at any time up to birth. Now, that will stop these investigations and prosecutions that are currently happening to women, which I think will be a huge relief for people like Nicola Packer, who shared her story about what it was like to be under investigation when she didn't realise she was pregnant until so late. It does mean, though, that medical practitioners can still be prosecuted. So the Abortion Act doesn't change fundamentally. Not criminalised to term, but the 24-week time limit does still exist, and 2 doctors would have to be involved in the process. It also means that the other amendment brought by Stella Creasy, which wanted abortion to be a fundamental right, will now not get to be voted on. That was determined by the Deputy Speaker. I still think MPs will be a little bit uncomfortable with the way that this has gone about through an amendment and not with its own bill. But Stella Creasy said she would support the amendment that wasn't brought by her, even if hers didn't get debated, because she said it would either have to be by the government, which it could never be because this would be this conscience vote, or it would have to be this golden buzzer situation of getting a private member's bill, which she didn't have confidence in. I've been speaking to anti-abortion campaigners for a deep dive that I've actually done on abortion for this topic ahead of this vote, and they seem incredibly motivated by what's going on in America and anti-abortion campaigners supported by the Trump administration there. So whilst this seems to be going in one direction because of the way that Parliament's going, I think this hasn't stopped the debate more generally, the abortion debate being at the forefront of British politics.
OK, Serena, thank you very much indeed. Serena Barker-Singh there. Well, it does feel like a historic moment. MPs voting to effectively decriminalise abortion so women can no longer be prosecuted for ending a pregnancy at any stage in that pregnancy. And Dehenna, it was a big majority, 242. Does that surprise you?
A huge majority. I think the size of the majority does surprise me. I mean, there's still quite a few abstentions there. I think maybe about up to 150 either abstentions or people who just simply weren't present, which is also quite sizable. But I think it shows just the nature of how much things have probably changed post-general election. Obviously, this is not a party political issue, but ordinarily, you know, the Conservative Party tends to be more socially conservative on issues like this, and now there are a lot more Labour MPs who clearly are that bit more socially liberal. But it is really, really a historic day, and I feel sort of a weird bit emotional about it.
Yeah,
actually.
it's a moment. It's
Absolutely.
a moment.
Yeah, it's a huge moment, and a very significant majority. That's important also because it would now go to the Lords, and I mean, wouldn't anticipate much opposition to it in the Lords anyway, but the Lords will look at the size of that majority and think, we're not going to mess about with this. So, look, that is going to go through. Just in the package there, hearing that abortion campaigners feel that or anti-abortion campaigners feel that what's happening in the US has given them a bit of momentum. I'm not so sure about that in the context of the United Kingdom. I still think that this would never be an issue which would determine general elections for the vast majority of people in this country. And I think people would also find it a little bit distasteful to try and turn it into that type of issue in a general election. It doesn't feel to me that our political culture would tolerate that sort of electioneering in the way in which it's very second nature to political figures in the US.
And I think that also comes in, as you were saying, the size of the majority, I think, perhaps prevents that happening as well. Thanks both very much indeed. Great to have your views on this. Well, we can return now to the international situation. It's a busy evening for us tonight. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, sat down with Keir Starmer at the G7 summit and she asked him about the prospect of de-escalation in the Middle East. You'll also hear her ask about another story we're covering on the show today, the ongoing fallout from Baroness Casey's review into grooming gangs.
Prime Minister, President Trump said to me yesterday that something will happen on the Middle East. He's convening the Situation Room. He's told 10 million residents of Tehran to evacuate the city. That's not de-escalation. It sounds like an American attack could be imminent. Do you know what's going on?
Well, I don't think you should read into that an American attack is imminent.
He's calling the Security Council together.
We had a 2-hour discussion with the President last night on the Middle East, on this very issue. And as a result of that, the G7 statement came out very clear about the risk of the nuclear programme in Iran, Israel's right to self-defence and the need to de-escalate across the region, including in Gaza.
So you don't think an attack is in his mind or US joining Israel? You don't think that's in his
the wording
mind?
of the G7 statement, I think, speaks for itself. And I sat next to the President for that 2-hour discussion as we were working through not just the issues, but the statement itself.
So you're not worried about escalation?
I'm clear that we need to de-escalate.
But are you worried about escalation?
Of course I'm worried about escalation, which is why my focus is on de-escalation. I'm worried about escalation in the region and the impact it would have in the region. I'm worried about the impact it would also have on Gaza, and I'm very pleased that the focus now is also on a ceasefire in Gaza, which I want to press for in coming days as well, but also the impact it's having on our economy.
On our economy. Prime Minister, as a former prosecutor, you brought first prosecutions for child rapists 15 years ago. I just want to put that on record, your record. But your decision now to hold an inquiry into grooming gangs after refusing 6 months ago to do so has sparked anger. Badenoch says you owe victims an apology. That irritates you, doesn't it? You don't think you do owe anyone an apology, do you?
Well, my frustration is on those that don't focus on the victims. I won't go over the last 15 years, but I brought the first prosecution 15 years ago in relation to these grooming cases. I then changed all the guidelines in criminal justice for prosecutors.
Does this irritate you?
I then called for mandatory reporting.
Does it irritate you that people are accusing you of not dealing with the situation?
I try to remain courteous at all times, but when politicians who were themselves in power, such as Badenoch, and did absolutely nothing. When people like me were calling for mandatory reporting, but that fell on deaf ears. So I stand on my record in relation to the national inquiry.
Does she owe people an apology? Do the Conservatives owe people an apology?
My focus is on the victims on this, not on politicians. I simply gently point out that some of those that are loudest now were the people who did absolutely nothing when they had the opportunity. But I do on the national inquiry because it is important. That needs to go wherever the evidence takes it.
And I'm going to come on to that.
Good,
I want to come on to that.
But
before I do, I just need to do this with you. You accuse politicians like Badenoch of jumping on a bandwagon for the far right. Was that misjudged to put it in those terms? Do you wish you hadn't said that now?
I was really clear that I was talking about politicians.
I know, I just said that.
Yeah, and I do think that those politicians need to answer the question which is why, when you were in power and had the opportunity to do something,
but do you wish you hadn't
nothing?
conflated it with right-wing bandwagon, because that's not what people's concerns about grooming gangs weren't necessarily right-wing. Do you sort of wish you hadn't said it?
I don't. I've never implied that other people with genuine concerns, and certainly not victims. I've been working with victims. I've seen firsthand
it's not
the
a
impact it
right-wing
has
bandwagon,
on
is it?
victims. But I was calling out those politicians. I mean, I am frustrated in politics when people shout and scream a lot and do nothing when they got the opportunity to do it. It's one of the worst aspects of politics, in my view.
OK. Those calling for an inquiry had a point, though, didn't they? Because Casey's findings are stark. Disproportionate numbers of Asian men responsible for child sex grooming gangs. But her words, do-gooders were trying to cover stuff up for fear of being branded racist. Do you recognise that? And who are the do-gooders?
Well, I absolutely recognise what Louise Casey wrote in her report. I've read every word of it. It's why I've decided there needs to be a national inquiry. But also, because of those words, I'm clear that inquiry must go wherever the evidence is.
Who are the do-gooders?
Well, I mean, that's Louise Casey's word. She will answer that for you. I can tell you in terms, because I had 7,000 staff when I was chief prosecutor, I was very clear that ethnicity should not play a part in any of the decisions that we took. I can't answer for other people, but I do recognise that if we're going to have a national inquiry...
didn't behave like you did?
Well, look, that's the concern, and we need to be open about that.
And that was your experience when you were prosecuting people?
Well, my experience was slightly different, because the case there was assumptions were being made about the reliability of some of these witnesses, which were completely wrong, which is why I changed the system. But I don't want to duck this one, because I think it is very important, Beth, that this inquiry, now having been put in place, must go where the evidence... and if that means into questions of ethnicity or the views that were taken by public officials or others, then that inquiry must go there. No stone will be left unturned.
No stone unturned. And this is where you have led me, because I really want to ask you this. Perpetrators have been prosecuted by you, but no one in institutions have lost their jobs. Counsellors, social workers, policemen, civil servants, people that were meant to protect these vulnerable young women, these girls, they have not been prosecuted. It cannot sit easily with you. Do you want prosecutions to flow from it? Would that help with public trust?
Well, I think that the inquiry needs to go where the evidence takes it. But then, in answer to your question, there must be accountability.
Right.
Because that is the reason that we need to leave no stone unturned. So I'm not going to say here X, Y, Z.
What's your instinct?
My instinct is there must be accountability.
So you're happy for social workers? You think these people should be held accountable? Social workers, policemen, people that failed?
Where the inquiry uncovers failure or wrongdoing, then there absolutely should be accountability. And that is amongst the purposes of an inquiry. And it's a statutory inquiry, as you know, which will therefore mean there's power to compel evidence and witnesses, because it's important that it is comprehensive. It's important that it gets to every single issue. And as part of that process, there's accountability for individuals who did wrong.
OK, PM, I'm out of time, but you're about to be Prime Minister for 1 year. So very quickly, one-word answers. Can you tell viewers the one thing you're most proud of and your biggest mistake?
Well, amongst the things, I could do a whole list, but I'm really proud that a year ago, probably, I was interviewed by you and I said we'd do 2 million extra appointments in the NHS in the first year of a Labour government. We've now done 3 million and waiting lists are coming down. There's a whole list of other things that I could probably go on about for a very, very long time. In terms of mistakes, look, I think that we haven't always told our story as well as we should, explained our decisions in the way that might, in retrospect, have been better, but that's the nature of politics. I suppose the story at the end of the first year is this. We had to clear up the mess, and the first year was really about that. But as we now turn into the second year with the spending review, now's the time we can show that having cleared up that mess, taken those tough but necessary decisions, now you can see in the spending review, with the investment we're making in our public services, in our infrastructure, in our jobs, apprentices, you name it, you can see the difference that a Labour government made.
OK, Prime Minister, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Beth joins us now from Alberta in Canada. And Beth, you know, that was a fascinating interview there. You covered an awful lot of ground. What were your kind of key takeaways?
Well, Sophie, there were two parts to it, really. The first is what is going on in Iran and Israel, and what is our Prime Minister saying about the state of affairs. He spent 2 hours with President Trump at a dinner last night. The G7 agreed a statement on Iran, Israel, where, yes, they talked about wider de-escalation in the region, but a statement that also reiterated that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon and Israel's right to defend itself. And no sooner did President Trump get back on Air Force One back to Washington than he was talking up the threat of more military action, warning the residents of Tehran, for example, to leave the city, and it has been quite confusing, Sophie. We had Chancellor Merz on the next level above us as we were doing those interviews. We were doing them at the golf club where they had their dinner and their family photo the night before. And as our Prime Minister was saying that he did not think that Trump was minded to get involved at this time, Chancellor Merz of Germany was actually saying exactly the opposite to journalists from Germany, saying he did not think that Trump had made up his mind or taken a decision, that he was trying to bring Iran to the negotiating table, but the jury's out. And you know that story is fast and fluid. So that was quite unclear, actually, as to where the Prime Minister thought Trump was at. And I wonder whether, rather than not knowing, it's a case of whereby Keir Starmer just is so ultra cautious when he talks about Donald Trump, because he doesn't want to do anything to ruffle feathers. President Macron made a statement saying that President Trump was going back to negotiate a ceasefire, and he got short shrift on Truth Social, Trump's media platform, last night. So I think Keir Starmer just been ultra cautious there.
And Beth, I've got to ask you as well about the exchange on grooming gangs as well. I mean, it's pretty clear that Keir Starmer feels he has a good story to tell for when he was Director of Public Prosecutions, but it's also fair to say that this government's been on a bit of a journey from the beginning of the year. What did you make of his responses?
Well, look, Sophie, I listened to your interview last night with Dame Casey, and it really struck me when she called out a fear of people dealing with perpetrators for fear of being accused of racism, and talking about the do-gooders that had sat on their hands and in a way made it worse and not help the situation at all. And so I wanted to ask him about that. I think there are a couple of things in it. The first thing is that whether he likes it or not, whether he thinks it's unfair or not, his refusal at the beginning of the year to call an inquiry only to U-turn now and say one's necessary, Louise Casey stating out clearly why they had come to that conclusion, or she rather had come to that conclusion, and he had accepted the recommendations. The politics of it looks uncomfortable for him, and you know, I wanted to put that to him, and he really stuck by his record, and there was a flash of anger, as much as you can get from Keir Starmer, when he said that he really dislikes it when people shout about things but they don't do stuff. He said, that's the thing I hate in politics. So defending his record, but I think there's a bigger question. I think you touched on it too last night, and that's, where does this go? And the reason I wanted to ask him about wider prosecutions, wider accountability is because, yes, rapists have been prosecuted, but what about the civil service, counsellors, social workers, those people that perhaps turned a blind eye because, as Casey said, they were fearful of accusing certain ethnic groups for accusations of racism? Will they be held accountable? Really what I wanted to ask him was whether he would open the door to prosecutions. He didn't go that far in that interview, but he was clear that he thinks if people did wrong, there should be accountability. He wants to follow the evidence. And I think it's something that, as this inquiry goes on, will become a bigger conversation. I think he will be pressed again on that.
It feels that is exactly it, and that's why people feel there is unfinished business here, frankly, because there hasn't been that accountability from those people who were supposed to keep those girls safe. Beth, thank you very much indeed, Beth Rigby, speaking to us there from Canada. Now, there has been a little bit of breaking news just while I was speaking to Beth, because two White House officials have told NBC News that the president is currently meeting in the Situation Room with his national security advisors. We know, of course, that he left the G7 early, but he is now currently meeting with those national security advisors in the Situation Room. There's been a couple of other drops from French President Emmanuel Macron as well, who said that the biggest error today would be to try and change regime in Iran through military means. Now, that is coming to us from Reuters. The French president saying the biggest error today would be to try and change regime in Iran through military means. And of course, that comes off the back of the Donald Trump post a little bit earlier today, saying that he knows where the supreme leader is, but he's safe for now. Well, in the meantime, the Iranian ambassador to the UK has been giving evidence to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee today. He was asked why Iran has apparently been enriching uranium to 60%, which is well above the threshold needed for civilian use.
There is no any intention from our side going to enrich to the level of the nuclear bomb, but unfortunately, politically motivated activities of the E3 in the recent session of the Board of Governors of IAEA make another mistake that Israeli regime used this pretext to attack us.
Well, let's return now to a story that we have touched on already this evening, the grooming gang scandal, because I just want to take a moment to pay tribute to somebody. Because this week, finally, we have a national inquiry into grooming gangs, and we're talking about accountability, honest conversations, about not shying away from uncomfortable truths. And we're also talking about the victims, about the children, because they were children when they were abused. But there is someone who has always believed those children. He listened to them and he fought for them when other people turned a blind eye, or worse, treated them like they were the criminals. And you know, the sadness is that he died just last month, a matter of weeks before Baroness Casey's review justified everything he fought for. Now, Andrew Norfolk was a journalist for The Times, and back in 2003, he noticed a trend where groups of men of Pakistani heritage were being prosecuted for grooming and abusing young girls. He said, I decided that I've got to get over my fear that this story is impossible to cover. And that then started years and years of unglamorous investigative work, which was met by a wall of silence when he put his findings to the police and to social services. And he was also constantly disappointed by the lack of action. Here he is back in 2012.
There was an opportunity here to begin what is essential, which is to begin the process of trying to understand why this pattern has put down such deep roots in Northern England and the Midlands, and it's sadly an opportunity that has been missed.
Well, Andrew Norfolk suffered a torrent of abuse. He was accused of racism, he received death threats, but after meeting the victims, he wasn't going to give up, and his first front page was published in 2011, A Conspiracy of Silence on UK Sex Gangs. It's taken another 14 years for that conspiracy of silence to be fully lifted. And, you know, it is a real shame that Andrew Norfolk isn't here to see that happen. Well, our social affairs correspondent, Becky Johnson, has this report.
As grooming scandals emerged in towns and cities across Britain, here in Rotherham, they knew the truth. Over 1,000 girls raped and trafficked in this town alone, the majority of their abusers, men of Pakistani heritage. It was all revealed in a report over a decade ago. Authorities tried to cover it up. We now know Whitehall officials tried to help them.
We're Britain's darkest secret.
Elizabeth, who was raped by dozens of Pakistani men from the age of 14, believes the national inquiry is long overdue.
They silence the wrong people, and we need the truth. Why did they do it?
Do you think if the authorities had confronted this issue head-on, that this is an issue predominantly with perpetrators of Pakistani origin, that you might have been spared your abuse?
I would have, you know, going back, the intelligence, everything. I should have never been a victim.
Should the Prime Minister apologise for not calling this inquiry sooner?
Absolutely, and I say that because of the insults as well, that he said, you know, really bad insults about jumping on the right bandwagon.
Louise Casey, whose report revealed the ethnicity of perpetrators have been shied away from, told MPs there needs to be a national reset.
I feel very strongly on issues that are as searing as people's race, when actually we know the prejudice and racism that people of colour experience in this country, to not get how you treat that data right, actually I think is a different level of public irresponsibility.
The Conservative leader held a press conference with the Shadow Home Secretary, surrounded by abuse survivors and their relatives, insisting she wasn't interested in political point scoring.
What I actually want to see is an inquiry that gets to the bottom of this. When I found out that there were 50 towns, and we found out about 4,000 new victims last year, 807 perpetrators, I just could not believe the scale of this. No one has joined the dots. That's what we're talking about now.
Youth worker Jane Senior became a whistleblower to help expose the scale of abuse here in Rotherham.
I was told that it was rocking the multicultural boat. It's about these people now standing up and recognising that we don't just make a presumption that a child is lying because they talk about the most horrendous abuse. We make a presumption that they're telling the truth.
Rotherham is like so many towns where everyone knew grooming was going on, but few in power wanted to talk about it. Here, the authorities aren't just accused of a cover-up. Over the years, there have also been allegations a number of police officers and councillors were involved in the abuse. Rotherham Council accepts there were failings, saying today things are completely different. But this scandal has gone on for so long, some here have lost faith that the full truth will ever emerge. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Rotherham.
That story is sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the deputy editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. Well, let's chat to Jonathan and Dehenna again, shall we? I just find this such a depressing story to cover. Jonathan, what's your sort of reflections? We heard that from Keir Starmer. We've obviously heard the review from Baroness Casey as well.
I mean, it's an absolutely depressing spectacle, isn't it? I mean, these crimes were heinous, disgusting, evil. It's the right thing that there is a national inquiry. Personally, I thought there should have been a national inquiry sooner, but I'm pleased that the government that I support as a ex-Labour politician has got there.
I think they're a bit slow then, do you?
Well, I mean, I understand the circumstances because they were arguing that there'd been a previous inquiry into child sexual exploitation under Alexis Jay, and that all those recommendations had been implemented. And then they asked Louise Casey, who's clearly produced an absolutely devastating report, which cannot be ignored and is not being ignored. So I understand the journey that they've gone on, but it would seem to me that a national inquiry was always going to be needed, and it's right that we've got one now which has to deliver justice. And I just cannot understand how so many vulnerable working class girls from poor, probably very chaotic backgrounds could have been ignored, not just in one town or city, but in so many towns and cities. I mean, what was going on? What does it say about our culture and our society that if you're from a poor background and you're working class and you're female, the authorities will dismiss you out of hand? I mean, that's systematic failure there. And it's a story we've heard time and time again when it comes to the abuse of children, actually.
Yeah, it's right, isn't it?
Absolutely right, and even worse, not just ignored, but in some cases criminally prosecuted for offences like prostitution. Young girls being abused, being criminally prosecuted is absolutely disgusting. I'm glad to see Kemi Badenoch there taking a more neutral tone, actually, and saying that this is above politics, because it is. There's no point in getting political on an issue like this. Yes,
Do you think that she went a bit political before then? Is that what you're saying? Or?
I think so, but I think in the sense that it actually made action probably happen. I think there probably was a bit that spurred on a wider debate around this horrendous scandal that finally now is seeing the right action. A national inquiry is absolutely the right thing. And there has to be accountability. There has to be accountability. Partly to make sure that these young girls get the justice that they deserve, but partly, and perhaps most crucially, to make sure that nothing like this is ever, ever allowed to happen again in Britain.
But the thing is, things like this do seem to happen again and again, don't they? I mean, it's a different type of exploitation, but, you know, there's so many parallels with children who were ignored in the Jimmy Savile scandal. And there'll be, I mean, what is it? Why are so many of our people who are supposedly employed to protect children seem to just ignore children when they're raising the most heinous examples of how they've been abused?
And
I just don't get it.
There's something about kids who have just been failed their whole lives that just break my heart. Like, you know, the kids in care, and you see it time and time again, that these are the most vulnerable children who we should be protecting as a society. And yet we are treating them, like you say, like at best ignoring them, and at worst treating them like they are the criminals. And these girls have prosecutions locked up.
And they're taking a really big, brave step to actually go to authority and say this is happening. I can't even imagine how terrifying that must have been, particularly if they were scared of any repercussions from those who are perpetrating these horrible crimes against them. To then be ignored is indefensible.
Yeah, it's
completely indefensible.
And thanks both very much indeed. You know, it's really, I know how it's awful speaking about this stuff. Obviously, even more important that we would continue to do so. So thanks both very much indeed. Well, to slightly change the tone of the programme now, Sarah Vine was married to Michael Gove, and the pair were also part of David Cameron's inner circle. But then along came Brexit, and like many relationships, the vote and subsequent political fallout detonated the close-knit friendship group. Her memoir, How Not to Be a Political Wife, is about power and betrayal, life at the top of British politics, and how to survive it. I spoke to her earlier. Thank you for being on the programme, and congratulations on your book. My first question is, you are a hack.
Yes.
How on earth did you end up being the wife of a politician?
Well, I was a hack before I was the wife of a politician, and he was a hack before he was a politician. So we met when we were both hacks. I was hackette, he was hack. And then he decided to become a politician, having, I have to say, almost 100% guaranteed that he wouldn't. But, you know, you can never trust a politician, can you?
It's fair advice. It's very fair advice. I feel like, given the fact you are a journalist and yet you were right at the centre of politics and Westminster throughout such a tumultuous period, it's almost given you quite a unique vantage
I think
point.
it has. I think in that respect I've been very lucky. I mean, journalism and politics are like oil and water, aren't they? I mean, they're really incompatible things. When I first started out, when Michael first went into politics, I should say, I was doing sort of lifestyle journalism. I was writing a sort of gentle kind of lifestyle column on the Times. I was doing a makeup column. And it wasn't until I sort of moved to the Daily Mail, which was in 2013, I think, that the dial went up a bit. So, and then I started writing more about politics. But also, I wouldn't have written about politics in those days because I didn't really know anything about it. So, you know, but whereas once I'd spent a few years in the world, I'd learnt a lot, so I knew a bit more.
You say you learnt a lot. I wonder, did your opinion of politics and how politics works, did you have a more favourable opinion of it or a less favourable?
I've always felt that good politics is politics that no one notices. I mean, my idea of a perfect politician is someone that, you know, just gets the job done and I don't ever have to see them or talk to them or think about them. And that's, you know, that's what But I think once I got into the world of politics, I realised that it's just a lot scarier and a lot more toxic than I think a lot of people realise.
Were there any particular moments of toxicity that stand out?
It's just that you become it's a process of dehumanisation because it's a sort of combination of factors. I wouldn't say there's any one sort of thing, but politicians themselves are basically addicts. It's basically like a gambling addiction. So in the same way that someone who's a gambler will say, I just need one more win and then, you know, that's it, then I'm going to retire. Politicians are the same. I just need one more great moment and then I'm going to retire. And it never quite comes. So they're always chasing the rainbow. And of course, politics is a very imperfect business. You can never actually... Kemi Badenoch put it very well when she said, you know, it's about the least perfect solution, and that is very true. You know, you can never quite get it right, and so that was something that I hadn't really understood or grasped because I hadn't really thought about politics in that way. And then I think the sort of landscape against which politics happens now, sort of social media landscape, the changing media landscape and the sort of 24-hour cycle means that politicians are under fire constantly, and it's very stressful.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. You can completely see that. One aspect of your book that really stood out to me is this feeling that you had throughout that you were an outsider. You write that even when you were larking around the pool in Ibiza with Samantha Cameron or mixing cocktails at Chequers, you had a voice in your ear saying, "You're a fake.
You don't belong here." Yeah, absolutely. I think that's because I grew up abroad, and and I've always felt a bit of an outsider coming back to the UK, even though I'm British, I'm from Wales. But it's just a cultural thing. It's almost like I don't quite speak the right language.
Do you think it's partly a class thing as well? And I ask that because, you know, David Cameron...
It's really interesting you say that, because lots of people have picked up on the class thing in the book. But when I wrote it, it wasn't really at the forefront of my mind. So it's obviously come out unconsciously.
But you think it is?
Yeah, so I obviously felt it, but didn't maybe quite realise how much I felt it. But yes, I think there's that thing where if you grow up in this country in a certain milieu, in a certain environment, and you go to certain schools and you know certain people and you belong to certain clubs, there's a way that you are people just listen to you because of what you are rather than who you are. And whereas if you're a sort of normal person like me and you don't have any important friends or you didn't go to it, you have to slightly fight to get your voice heard. And so I think there's a degree of almost unconscious entitlement that goes on.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, how the class is. It's not malicious. It is just what it is.
And there's lots of examples. You know, you say that it was a policeman who didn't believe you were a guest of the Prime Minister's wife for the Queen's speech. Jeremy Clarkson once asked you to bring him a glass of red wine because he thought you were a waitress at the party.
I mean, I am quite a good waitress, in fairness. I mean,
you did bring him the wine.
But I did actually bring him a glass of red wine.
Do you think it was partly... Because there has been some criticism of David Cameron and George Osborne and the kind of boys' clubs. Do you think that was part of that?
Yes, I think it was. I think they are very well-connected people. But they're also very intelligent and very capable. I mean, they're not idiots. It's not as though they're sort of idiot toffs. They are brilliant at what they do. And for them, I think they move through the world with a certain ease. You know, I don't move through the world with ease. I mean, apart from the fact that I'm a journalist and I'm in a business that means that you don't necessarily do. Because, you know, to be a good journalist, you always have to be a bit of an outsider, right? Because you never know when the person that you've just had dinner with 2 nights ago is going to be sitting in front of you, you know, in a studio. You've got to ask them the tough questions because that's your job. And so journalism is an outsider profession, really, generally speaking, or if it's done properly, it's an outsider profession. So, but I think they sort of move through the world with ease, and they do glide. They do glide.
Did Michael go? Was he part of that kind of gliding, or was he paddling?
I think Michael's paddling quite hard underneath, but no. So I don't think he's a glider. I think he finds it quite difficult. I mean, he's very. I mean, Michael has a brain the size of a planet, and so he is brilliant at doing whatever it is he wants to do. But I think on a sort of personal, emotional level, I don't think he's a glider, no.
Talking about the changing nature of the Conservative Party politics generally, how do you think Kemi Badenoch is doing?
Well, I think if you ask Twitter, you'd say she's doing quite badly, but I think that she is a grown-up. I think she knows where she's going. She's got a really good idea and a really good vision. We live in a world of fast politics, fast food, fast politics. She is slow politics. It's not a popular thing to try and be, but if
she's the broccoli, you know, eat your greens.
She is the broccoli, yes. I mean, I'm not sure she'd appreciate us saying that, but yes. So she, you know, and so what she wants to do is you know, rebuild the Conservative Party in a solid, sensible, functional way.
There have been rumours in Westminster that kind of Michael Gove is the silent hand behind her campaign.
Absolutely not. No, they've had a falling out. No, I mean he thinks she's very good, but no, she's definitely not. I mean, what you have to understand about Westminster, I always think, and I'm not sure people really, you know, having been on the other side, is that 99% of the things that you hear are just nonsense. There's about 10%, you know, 1% of truth in them. And yes, Michael really admires Kemi and thinks she's very good, and they work together. But in terms of running her campaign, he's not been involved at all.
Well, let's bring in Jonathan Ashworth and Dehenna Davison, shall we? I mean, I guess what really came through for Sarah Vine is just how rubbish it is being the wife of a politician, and I feel like you two are probably kind of smiling happily now that you've left it all behind as well, right? What do you make of the chat?
Well, I mean, it's a very punishing life for your family, and one of the things which I felt a sense of relief when I lost was I could now spend more time with my 2 girls, with my 14-year-old and 11-year-old, they both had a very rough time in my election campaign. It was a very brutal election campaign for all the other reasons that we don't need to go into now about the international situation. But I remember when I stood on that stage and I'd lost, the first thing that came to my mind was, at least I've got more time now with my kids because I've missed out so much time with them.
It's massive. And also the other thing I was keen to ask you about as well is, it really struck me when she was talking about being, like, judged, I guess, assumed that she was a waitress, people didn't think she could be friends with the wife of the Prime Minister. And you obviously entered Parliament very young.
Yes.
So I imagine you got a bit of this as well, perhaps.
Well, I was just a young female northern working class bisexual Tory MP. There aren't too many of those to the pound. So often, you know, I think one of the most common questions I ever got asked if there was a reception around Westminster was, oh, which MP do you work for? And I'd be like, myself? No, I work for the people. That's who I work for. And getting stopped by security, thinking I'm a staffer going in MPO-only areas and things, which, you know, for the first few months was hilarious. After that point, it just got a bit kind of, here's my pass, I am an MP, I promise, I'm not fibbing. But I think it's good actually to have different people involved in politics, different people from all different backgrounds, different ages, different classes. We all bring a different perspective, and you need that. If you're making policy for the whole country, you need a huge range of people.
Yeah, it's definitely right. Yeah, do you agree with that then?
Oh, absolutely. You need all walks of life in Parliament. And I think one of the things that is a shame, and it becomes a bit of a cliche to say, but it's true, that it is harder, or you get less working class people going into politics. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting that Sarah Vine's talking about how difficult she finds it as presumably someone from a more sort of lower middle class background. I don't know, but
yeah, I don't think she's trying to position herself as working class. I think she's just saying she's a different set.
And that's not to say not on the Labour side, and that it's full of sort of, you know, the very well-to-do, not at all, but even on the Labour side, because Labour's supposed to be the party of the working class, it is harder for working class people to break through, and we've got to think about that and how we can change the system.
Yeah, it feels like we've been talking about class tonight, but it's an important issue, and it runs through so much of our society, doesn't it? And how we kind of grapple, you know, with sort of those issues as well.
I think so much of it is a bit of sort of self-gaslighting and self-bias as well. You sort of tell yourself you don't belong there, you're not from that background, and actually sort of censor yourself a little bit, whereas actually, in terms of your skills, your aptitude, you're absolutely up there. It's just having the confidence sometimes to put yourself forward.
Yeah, as she was saying, this kind of voice in her head telling her that, you know, you don't belong and all that kind of thing as well. Thanks both very much indeed. It's been great to have you on the show tonight, Dehenna and Jonathan there. Well, that's it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Another busy show here on the Politics Hub. But next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Mee. And then, of course, at 9 p.m, you've got The World with Yalda Hakeem. But I will see you tomorrow at 7 p.m.